There's a guy who wants to talk to you. Serious?
I've been getting a lot of requests to return to the moon landing conspiracies, but I've been hesitant because honestly that kind of bores me. But one request I've been getting repeatedly is to check out Jara White's Moon Faker series on the Van Allen radiation belts called Radiation Anomaly. You'll recall that the Van Allen belts are areas surrounding the Earth of high energy particles that moon landing deniers believe are so unsafe that astronauts could not possibly have gone to the moon. Now, this video series has some 20 or so parts, and I honestly don't have that kind of time on my hands, but I thought I'd go through the first video in this series and see how it went because supposedly it had great information that no one's been able to dispute. And you know what? I'm glad I did, because not only is this video a great example of poor thinking in action, it's actually the first moon landing conspiracy video I've come across that actually defeats itself. So let's watch this video. After opening with some really cheesy graphics, he recaps that the Van Allen belts are made up of particles with a range of energies.
Belts are composed of protons and electrons with energies as high as 100 million electron volts.
He then discusses how a solar flare in 2005 sent Van Allen-type radiation toward the Earth, endangering astronauts who may have been out for a spacewalk, so they had to go inside and rotate the ship. With the NASA writer noting that a thin-skinned spacesuit would have offered little resistance and how protons are accelerated to nearly light speed. Apparently this contradicted what someone had said about how fast solar radiation could get to the Earth, but this has no real pertinence to the moon landing, so I'm going to let this conflict pass by.
In December 1998, CNN reported, new observations by an array of satellites show changes in the Earth's magnetic field can accelerate electrons in the belts to nearly the speed of light, transforming them into what some researchers describe as killer electrons. Under those conditions, the charged...
The article then goes on to describe how under these conditions particles penetrate deeper and are more dangerous to people and equipment.
Gee, I wonder how the service module's bulk managed to shield the astronauts traveling through this flood of near light speed particles.
So let me say here that I have to give props to Jara White, because it only took 4 minutes and 22 seconds for him to make me want to punch my computer screen, and usually it takes at least 7 minutes for someone who claims to be scientific to get under my skin. Did you see what he just did? He found evidence that under certain circumstances the Earth's magnetic field could accelerate particles to near light speed. Here, note that it says can accelerate and under those conditions. He then states as an established fact that the particles the lunar astronauts encountered were at those special circumstances, with nothing to back that up. So right here at 4 minutes and 22 seconds, he's shown that he's not possessing critical thinking skills, or that he's purposely disingenuous. Now, I could have stopped these videos right here, but I'm glad I didn't, because this has a great payoff. White then goes on to discuss the ramifications of exposure to radiation from this 2005 solar flare, and I guess through the transitive properties of his assumption, the lunar astronauts got this too. There appears to be a discrepancy between the symptoms a NASA spokesman gave for possible radiation exposure to the solar flare, and I believe we're supposed to infer that this 2005 discrepancy indicates a 1969 lie or something. He then makes a direct comparison of the Van Allen belts to this 2005 solar flare.
Because both the belts and NOAA 720 are composed of 100 MeV protons.
Now let's look closely again at what White just did. He states here as a blanket fact that the Van Allen belts are composed of 100 million electron volt particles, although at the very beginning of his video he shows that the Van Allen belts are made up of particles at a range of energy levels with a peak of 100 million electron volts.
Belts are composed of protons and electrons with energies as high as 100 million electron volts.
He then continues.
This confirms Van Allen's research that indicated that astronauts passing through the belts would receive 100 rem per hour.
Note that he stated that the astronauts would receive 100 rem per hour as a fact. He then shows a statement made by Van Allen that directly undermines his assertion.
Our measurements show that the maximum radiation level as of 1958 is equivalent to between 10 and 100 roentgens per hour, depending on...
As you can see, Van Allen said the maximum was between 10 and 100 roentgen per hour, not a definite 100 rem as White states. Also, White is making an assumption here that Van Allen was discussing REM, which is Roentgen equivalent in man, the absorption of radiation in flesh, because Van Allen himself only says Roentgen and not Rem, and there's a significant difference between the two of them, and these differences do matter. At this point, White decides to go after some of his online opponents who tried to say that the Van Allen belts have satellites in them all the time, and that's false, so he can do that. And he also goes after them for being offensive name callers, and that's fine as well. I just didn't want you to think I was skipping over anything important over here. White then locks down some facts. He shows that the Van Allen belts have a range of 1,000 to 5,000 kilometers for the inner belt and 15 to 25,000 kilometers for the outer belt. These, of course, are soft boundaries. He then shows that our satellites orbit safely beyond the outer border. Now, it should be noted that the Apollo 11 spacecraft went into orbit before zipping off to the moon, and its orbital distance was 185 kilometers above the Earth. That is well below the 1,000 kilometer inner belt border. He finishes this video by discussing the Van Allen belt safe zones for satellites, and this part is what makes sitting through the whole thing worth it.
And you don't have to take my word that satellites don't operate in the Van Allen belts. On March 9, 2005, New Scientist, the world's #1 science and technology news service, released an article called Lightning Linked to Gap in Radiation Belts. Lightning bursts in clouds are responsible for clearing the enigmatic safe zone for satellites lying between two donut-shaped radiation belts surrounding the Earth, say NASA researchers. The inner ring extends from 1,000 to 7,000 kilometers above the equator, while the outer ring starts at 13,000 kilometers and extends to 25,000 kilometers. The trapped radiation imperils both humans and spacecraft, so satellites and astronauts fly above or below the radiation belts or in the gap between them.
As you can see, White is clearly stating here that the satellites and astronauts are capable of avoiding dangerous exposure in the Van Allen belts by either staying below them in a low Earth orbit or passing through them and getting into a higher orbit, like, say, the moon. Now, I want to thank Gerald White for closing the Van Allen radiation belt discussion for me, because with this video, he's done a tremendous service. Not only did he show that it's completely possible to pass through the Van Allen belt and avoid dangerous exposure, he also gave perfect examples of how conspiracy theorists make false assumptions based on their prejudices and come to seemingly logical conclusions that are utterly flawed because they're based on a false premise. Now, I've said it before, and I will say it again, that critical thinking matters.
That's my job! That's what I do! I don't lose! I win! Is there no one on this planet to even challenge me?
Maybe you came by to congratulate me on last night's victory.